The HOA letter came on a Tuesday morning, taped crookedly to our front door like a threat pretending to be polite. Final notice: NON compliance. No signature. Just a logo and a warning about unauthorized modifications to our property. I laughed when I read it. We hadn't changed a thing. No fence, no paint, no driveway work. Nothing. My wife, Sarah, didn't laugh. She read it once. Then again. Then quietly folded it and set it on the counter. "They're escalating," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "It's an HOA, not the mafia." She didn't answer. Just looked out the window, eyes sharp, calculating. Sarah has a way of going still when something's wrong. Most people mistake it for fear. It isn't. It's focus. I left for work around noon. By the time I hit the freeway, I'd already forgotten about the letter. I shouldn't have. At 2:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Sarah, don't come home yet." That alone made my chest tighten. Me why? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then, "Sarah, HOA sent representatives." Before I could reply, my neighbor Mike called. "Hey," he said, voice low. "You got a situation at your place." "What kind of situation?" 3 bikes. Big guys. Leather vests. They're parked across your driveway." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Are they threatening her?" "They're posturing," he said. Talking loud. Laughing. "One of them knocked on your door with his boot." I made a U-turn without thinking. By the time I pulled into the street, I saw them. 3 motorcycles, engines still ticking. 3 men built like brick walls, covered in patches and ink. One leaned against Sarah's car. Another was pacing. The third stood at the door, smirking. I parked half a block away and watched. Sarah opened the door. She didn't look scared. She didn't raise her voice. She stood straight, hands relaxed at her sides. I couldn't hear what was said, but I could read body language. The tallest biker leaned in too close. Sarah smiled. Not a friendly smile. A measured one. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. That's when things changed. The biker's grin faded. Another one shifted his stance. The third glanced at the street, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. 3 minutes. That's all it took. I watched one of them pull out a phone, hands suddenly unsteady. Another took a step back like he'd misjudged the distance to a ledge. The loudest one, the one who'd kicked the door, swallowed hard. They weren't shouting anymore. They were listening. Sarah spoke calmly, her voice even. She gestured once, slow, precise. The tallest biker shook his head. Fast. Nervous. Then something I'll never forget happened. He said, "We didn't know." Another added, "This was a mistake." The third looked straight at the ground. They mounted their bikes in a hurry. No laughs, no swagger. Engines roared, tires spun, and in seconds they were gone. I pulled into the driveway just as Sarah stepped back inside. When I walked through the door, she handed me the HOA letter. "They won't bother us again," she said. I searched her face. "What did you say to them?" She met my eyes, calm as ever. Just the truth. Outside, the street was silent. And somewhere, 3 biker thugs were realizing they'd chosen the wrong house. The HOA didn't go quiet. They panicked. At 7:03 the next morning, my phone started vibrating like it was possessed. Missed calls, voicemails, emails marked urgent and time-sensitive, all from the same place. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Sarah watched me scroll through them while sipping her coffee, completely unbothered. "They found out already?" I asked. She shrugged. Word travels fast when people get scared. I played the first voicemail. Mr. Collins," a man said, voice tight and overly cheerful. "This is Greg from the HOA board. Just calling to, clarify yesterday's misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it now. Another voicemail followed, this one from a woman. "We'd like to formally apologize for any distress caused by unauthorized third parties acting on our behalf." I paused the message. Unauthorized. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice of words. I didn't laugh. Something about the sudden shift, from threats to apologies, made my skin prickle. HOAs don't reverse course unless someone higher up tells them to, or unless they realize they've stepped on a landmine. At 9:15, there was a knock at the door. Not a biker boot this time. Two men in polo shirts stood on the porch, clipboards clutched like shields. One was Greg, the voice from the voicemail. The other I recognized from the neighborhood meetings, Trevor, the board's compliance officer. They looked like they hadn't slept. "Good morning," Greg said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were hoping to speak with you and your wife." Sarah stepped beside me. Both men stiffened. Trevor swallowed. "Ma'am." Sarah smiled politely. "What can we do for you?" she asked. Greg cleared his throat. "We're here to officially rescind all violation notices issued to your household." I blinked. "All of them?" "Yes. Effective immediately." Trevor flipped his clipboard around, showing a form already signed. "And," Greg continued, "we want to assure you that Cedar Ridge HOA does not condone intimidation, harassment, or extracurricular enforcement." Sarah tilted her head. "Then why did you hire them?" Greg's face went pale. "We didn't. Not officially." "Unofficially?" I asked. Silence. Trevor jumped in. "A contractor took liberties. He's been terminated." Sarah nodded slowly. "Good." Greg exhaled, relieved. "So, we're all clear?" Sarah looked at him for a long second. Almost. The relief drained from his face. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You will put everything you just said in writing. You will note that no future inspections, notices, or fines will be issued to this property without proper legal review." Trevor scribbled furiously. "And," she added, "you'll update your records to mark this address as do not contact directly." Greg hesitated. "That's not standard." Sarah met his eyes. "Then make it standard." He nodded immediately. When they left, they didn't shake hands. They practically fled. I closed the door and turned to her. "Okay. You don't just scare biker enforcers and HOA boards for fun. What's really going on?" Sarah leaned against the counter. "Do you remember when we moved here?" she asked, "and I told you some quiet neighborhoods aren't actually quiet?" "Yes. This is one of those." She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. An email thread filled the screen. Internal HOA messages. Names, timestamps, attachments. "How did you get those?" I asked. "I asked for them." "That's not an answer." She smiled slightly. "I used to do compliance investigations. Organizations like HOAs are sloppy. They rely on intimidation because they don't expect resistance." I scrolled. One attachment caught my eye. Expense report, external enforcement services. "They've been hiring thugs." I asked. "Across 3 neighborhoods," she said. "Different names. Same bikes." A chill ran through me. "That's illegal." "Yes." "And they sent them to our house." "Yes." I looked up at her. "So, what did you tell them yesterday?" She closed the laptop. "I told them exactly who would start asking questions if this ever happened again," she said. "And how quickly those questions would spread." "You didn't threaten them." "No," she said. "I educated them." Outside, a car slowed as it passed our house, then sped up. The neighborhood felt different now, like everyone was suddenly aware of invisible lines. My phone buzzed again. An email from the HOA. Subject: Community Policy Update. Sarah glanced at it and nodded. "They're done," she said. I believed her. But somewhere in Cedar Ridge, people were realizing that bullying had limits. And in Chapter 3, they were about to find out what happens when those limits are crossed anyway. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Public. Mandatory. Community transparency session. That alone told me everything. When organizations panic, they don't hide, they perform. Sarah and I arrived 5 minutes early. The clubhouse was already half full, neighbors whispering in clusters, heads turning the moment we walked in. Phones went still. Conversations dropped. Someone had tried to warn them. Greg stood at the front with a microphone he clearly didn't want. Trevor sat beside him, flipping through papers like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into a miracle. Sarah chose a seat in the second row.
calm, upright.
Alert. I leaned in. You don't have to do this. I know, she said softly. But they do. Greg tapped the mic. It squealed. Thank you all for coming, he began. We want to address recent concerns about HOA enforcement practices. Recent concerns. That's what attempted intimidation gets called when lawyers are listening. He launched into rehearsed nonsense. Policy language, contractor misuse, internal review. Heads nodded. Some people looked relieved. Then Trevor stood up. There will also be an opportunity for resident comments, he said quickly. Brief comments. Sarah raised her hand. The room froze. Trevor's eyes widened just a fraction before he nodded. Yes, ma'am. Sarah stood. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't raise her voice. I have one question, she said. Who authorized payments to external compliance services operating without licenses? Murmurs rippled through the room. Greg blinked. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Sarah clicked a button on her phone. The screen behind them, meant for PowerPoint slides, changed. An expense spreadsheet appeared. Names.
Dates. Amounts.
The murmurs turned sharp. That document, Sarah continued, was sent internally to 7 board members over 14 months. It was approved unanimously. Greg's mouth opened. No sound came out. And a follow-up question, she said. Why were these individuals instructed to use intimidation instead of legal notice? Someone in the back whispered, Wait, what? Trevor stood abruptly. This meeting is getting out of. Sarah looked at him. Just looked.
He sat back down.
She turned to the room. If anyone here received threats, harassment, or unannounced inspections, you should know this wasn't isolated. It was systematic. A woman stood up. They came to my house last year. A man followed. Mine too. Another voice. They said we'd regret it if we didn't comply. The room erupted. Greg raised his hands. Everyone, please. Sarah spoke again, calm as a still surface hiding depth. I should probably clarify something, she said. Because this won't end with tonight. The room went silent. I used to oversee compliance investigations involving organizations that believed they were too small to matter.
She paused.
They were wrong. Someone near the front swallowed hard. I don't represent anyone here, Sarah continued. But when illegal enforcement crosses into intimidation, it stops being an HOA issue. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it once, then added, and for the record, external authorities are already reviewing this. Greg slumped into his chair. After the meeting, no one rushed for the exits. People gathered around Sarah instead, asking questions, sharing stories, comparing notes. Outside, red and blue lights flashed briefly at the entrance. Not dramatic, just official. An unmarked sedan idled near the curb. A man in a plain jacket stepped out, nodded once to Sarah, and walked inside. I exhaled slowly. You told them yesterday this would happen, didn't you? Yes. And the bikers? They were subcontractors, she said. They quit the moment they realized who was watching. I looked back at the clubhouse, where voices rose and fell in frantic waves. So what happens now? Sarah slipped her hand into mine. Now, she said, they learn that quiet neighborhoods aren't unprotected. The unmarked sedan pulled away. Behind us, the HOA sign flickered as if unsure whether it still belonged there. And somewhere between fear and relief, Cedar Ridge finally understood something important. By Monday morning, Cedar Ridge looked the same. But it wasn't. The grass was still trimmed. The signs were still polished. The gates still opened on time. Yet everyone moved like they were aware of something invisible, rules rewritten without being posted. At 8:42 a.m., an email hit every resident's inbox. Subject: Board resignations and interim measures. I read it twice. 3 board members had resigned effective immediately. 1 was on temporary leave pending review. All enforcement activities were suspended. An independent audit was announced. Sarah read it once and closed her laptop. They're trying to survive, she said. A black SUV rolled slowly past our house and kept going. No one waved anymore. At noon, there was another knock at the door. This time, it wasn't the HOA. A man in a plain jacket stood on the porch, badge clipped but not displayed. Mid-40s. Calm eyes. The kind of person who didn't introduce himself loudly. "Mrs. Collins?" he asked. Sarah stepped forward. "Yes." He nodded. "Thank you for coming forward." I watched the exchange, heart steady but alert. "We've spoken to 6 residents already," the man continued. "Your documentation filled in the gaps." He handed her a card. No agency name. Just a number. "If anyone contacts you directly, board members, contractors, anyone, call me." Sarah accepted it. "They won't." He allowed himself a faint smile. "That's what I'm hoping." When he left, the street felt quieter somehow. Not peaceful.
Contained.
That evening, Mike from down the block stopped by. "I owe you an apology," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I saw the bikes that day and didn't step in." "You called me," I said. That mattered. He nodded. "Word is, those guys got dropped by everyone. No jobs. No calls." Sarah said nothing. Mike lowered his voice. "What did you say to them?" She met his eyes. "Enough." That night, as the sun dipped behind the houses, headlights appeared again. 3 motorcycles slowed at the corner. My chest tightened, just for a second. They didn't turn onto our street. They idled, engines rumbling low, then rolled on. No revving, no stares, just avoidance. Later, sitting on the back porch, I finally asked the question I'd been circling for days. "You never told me exactly what you used to do." Sarah leaned back, watching the dark settle in. "I investigated organizations that abused authority," she said. "Mostly small ones. They thought being local made them invisible." "And the bikers?" "They were told to scare me," she said evenly. "Instead, they learned who files reports and who follows up." I let that sink in. "You could have shut this down quietly," I said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" She looked at the neighborhood. At the houses, the lights, the people who'd been afraid in their own homes. "Because silence teaches bullies that it works." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere, a door closed. Somewhere else, someone slept easier. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from the HOA's new interim board. All prior fines refunded. Enforcement protocols revised. Direct resident contact suspended indefinitely. Sarah smiled just a little.
Done.
I asked. She nodded. Done. Across Cedar Ridge, rules were being rewritten by people who finally understood consequences. And in our quiet house, one truth settled in deep. Mercy isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the warning. 2 weeks later, Cedar Ridge held another meeting. This one was different. No banners. No speeches. No microphone feedback. Just folding chairs, a neutral agenda, and a room full of people who had learned, quickly, that power works best when it's watched. Sarah and I didn't sit in the front this time. We didn't need to. An interim board member stood up and read from a prepared statement. All enforcement actions taken over the last 18 months have been deemed invalid. A ripple went through the room. All fines refunded. All warnings expunged. Any third-party compliance services have been permanently terminated. Someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room joined in. Not loud, not celebratory, but relieved. The kind of applause that says it's finally over. Outside, as people filtered into the evening air, neighbors stopped by our car. A woman thanked Sarah quietly. A man nodded once and said, "You did what we couldn't." Someone else simply said, "We sleep better now." Sarah accepted none of it like praise. She treated it like closure. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced at the old HOA sign near the entrance. It was gone. In its place stood a temporary notice. Community managed, resident oversight in effect.
Plain. Honest.
Unintimidating. At home, life returned to something close to normal. No letters. No surprise inspections. No slow cars lingering too long. One afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a folded leather vest patch. The club name had been cut away, the stitching undone. No note. Just an apology that didn't need words. I showed it to Sarah. She nodded once and dropped it into the trash. Lesson learned, I asked.
For them, she said.
Yes. That evening, we sat on the porch as the neighborhood settled into itself. Kids rode bikes. Dogs barked. Someone grilled dinner a few houses down. Quiet, but not the kind that hides things. The honest kind. I looked at her then, not as the calm figure everyone feared or respected, but as my wife, who'd protected strangers without asking for credit. You know, I said, most people would have handled this with lawyers. She smiled softly. Most people don't know how bullies think. And you do. Yes. The sun dipped low, painting the houses gold. Will this happen again? I asked. Not here, she said. And not like that. Because now, Cedar Ridge knew something it hadn't before. Intimidation only works in the dark. And all it takes to end it is one person willing to turn on the light. The end. 3 months passed. Cedar Ridge faded back into anonymity, the good kind. The kind where nothing happens because nothing needs to. Then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. That's new. Bad new. I asked. Unexpected. She answered. Mrs. Collins, a man said on speaker, voice careful and formal. My name is Daniel Reyes. I represent the State Oversight Committee reviewing residential governance abuses. I sat up. We're closing our report, Reyes continued. Before we do, there's one thing we wanted to confirm. Sarah didn't speak. After Cedar Ridge, he said, we began receiving tips. Similar patterns. Same shell companies. Same intimidation tactics. I felt a chill. How many places? I asked. Reyes paused. 7. Across 2 counties. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. And, she asked, and every trail leads back to a consulting firm that dissolved last week, Reyes said. Accounts emptied. Records shredded. So they're running, I said. Yes, he replied. But they made one mistake. Sarah waited. They listed you as the catalyst event. Silence filled the room. Meaning? Sarah asked. Meaning, Reyes said. After your incident, everything changed. Payments stopped. Contractors vanished. Board members resigned in clusters. I let out a slow breath. So, it's over? Reyes exhaled softly. For them?
Yes.
For us? We're rewriting guidelines statewide. He hesitated. I wanted you to hear that directly. Sarah nodded. Thank you for telling us. When the call ended, the house felt still. You okay? I asked. She looked out the window at the street, kids playing, neighbors talking, life continuing. They thought this was just about one house, she said. One HOA. But it wasn't. No, she agreed. It was about what happens when people assume no one is watching. A week later, a letter arrived from the state. No logos. No threats. Just a notice. Residential Governance Oversight Act. Updated enforcement protections enacted. I read it twice. This started with a fake inspection, I said. Sarah smiled faintly. It ended with accountability. That night, as the lights dimmed across Cedar Ridge, I realized something important. The bikers had begged for mercy because they saw consequences coming. The HOA collapsed because it learned fear works both ways. But the real change? That came because one quiet moment of intimidation met someone who refused to look away. And somewhere else, some other neighborhood, someone would sleep easier, never knowing why. Because sometimes, the strongest stories don't echo loudly. They just make sure the noise never comes back. A year later, no one in Cedar Ridge talked about it anymore. That was the sign it had truly ended. The new HOA, if you could even call it that, operated quietly. No surprise notices. No aggressive inspections. Meetings were optional, short, and painfully boring. Exactly how they should be. Sarah and I were packing boxes in the garage when I found it again. The old HOA letter, folded thin with time. I held it up. Remember this? I asked. She glanced at it, then smiled. Barely. That letter kicked off everything, I said. Hard to believe. She took it from me and dropped it into the shredder without ceremony. Paper threats only matter if people believe in them, she said. That afternoon, a moving truck pulled into the house 2 doors down. New neighbors. Young couple. Nervous smiles. The kind of people who still believed rules were always fair if followed. They waved. We waved back. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. The woman from next door stood there, holding a small box of pastries.
Hi, she said.
We just moved in. I heard this neighborhood used to be strict. I chose my words carefully. It learned. She laughed, unsure what that meant. Sarah stepped forward. If anyone ever makes you uncomfortable, HOA or otherwise, come talk to us. The woman nodded, relief visible on her face. When the door closed, I looked at Sarah. You didn't tell her anything. She doesn't need the story, Sarah said. She just needs to know she's not alone. That night, we sat on the porch again, watching lights blink on one by one. You ever miss it? I asked. The investigations. The pressure. She thought for a moment. I miss stopping things before they hurt people. You still did. She leaned her head against my shoulder.
Yes.
Just closer to home. Down the street, a patrol car cruised past. Not slow, not fast. Routine. Boring.
Perfect.
Cedar Ridge had become something rare. A place where authority was visible, accountable, and unafraid of daylight. And I realized then that the bikers, the HOA, the threats, those weren't the real story. They were just noise. The real story was what happened after the noise stopped. Because power hates witnesses. And once people learn to watch back, the echo never really fades.